It's the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre. Thank you so much for joining us. Two Cleveland Guardians pitchers suspended for months while under criminal investigation were indicted this week, arraigned in federal court, and could face up to 65 years in prison. Emmanuel Clase and Luis Ortiz are charged with multiple crimes in connection with an alleged scheme to rig pitches they threw so bettors in the know and they could profit on wagers about whether the pitch would be a ball or a strike or fast or slow. Mayor Justin Bibb visited Collinwood High School for a town hall session and got angry reaction this week to the Cleveland Metropolitan School District's plan to merge Collinwood with Glenville High School as part of a district-wide restructuring amid a huge decline in enrollment. Fights, property damage, and general chaos has residents, first responders, and the state concerned about a residential center treating children with behavioral and mental health issues in Ashland County. And Canton City Council is fed up with public comments. Rather than place restrictions, as cities like Akron and Cleveland have done, they eliminated the public comment section of their public meetings. Joining me to discuss all of this week's top news from IdeaStream Public Media, Akron Canton reporter Anna Huntsman. Hey, Anna.
Hey.
Good to have you with us.
Glad to be here.
And from the Marshall Project Cleveland, that's a nonprofit newsroom covering criminal justice, Editor-in-Chief Phil Trexler joins us. Hey, Phil.
Hey, Mike. How are you?
Good to have you with us
Good to
today.
be here.
And in Columbus, a woman who has rigged a bet for me on this show. I put $200 on her saying go Guards. State House News Bureau Chief Karen Kassler.
Go Guards.
Thank you. $200 richer.
I knew
That is
she
how-
was gonna say it. She's gonna say it like that.
That is how you influence a prop bet. All right. You can join us too by sending an email to soi@ideastream.org. And right now, let's get ready to roundtable. All right. The Guardians. Star closer Emmanuel Clase and starting pitcher Luis Ortiz were indicted this week. They're charged with throwing pitches that bettors wagered would happen and profiting from the bets. Shockingly, Clase is accused of engaging in the enterprise for years and even texting and talking on the phone with a co-conspirator about it during a game. The FBI took Ortiz into custody Sunday in Boston. Federal agents took Clase into custody yesterday in New York. Each has been released on bond after entering pleas of not guilty. Now, we had the NBA betting scandal we discussed about a month ago that ensnared former Cavs player Damon Jones and Clevelander Terry Rozier, who played for the Miami Heat. And I read yesterday that more than 1,000 Turkish footballers are accused of gambling-related shenanigans there. So the question really is sports safe? And Phil, now that we have ubiquitous sports gambling right on your phone, you can bet on not just who will win the game, but will the ball as he throws it be a strike or a ball? You got to wonder, where is this going?
Yeah, and there are more examples of those little prop bets, the micro bets that folks can make. You know, I'm a sports fan. I dabble in the parlays, but I think everybody saw this coming. You know, there was a reason why sports was kept a very strict distance from gambling for decades, since the beginning, because it's the integrity of the game that's at stake.
Right.
So there were all those warning signs. Folks were, talking about not only the social impact that they have on families and people, but also, too, on the integrity of the game. And here's a perfect example now. Two guys, and you thought it would never happen because, they make too much money. They'll never do this. But here we are,
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. It was almost $1 million, so apparently not a lot of money, but the guy makes, Ortiz was making almost $1 million. Clase was north of $6 million a year, and the profiting off of these prop bets for the bettors was $450,000, which meant a percentage of that. In one case, it was $7,000 for Clase and $5,000 for Ortiz. That's what they got out of this. It's chump change in peanuts, really.
Right. I mean, they're charged with bribe, with wire fraud and money laundering, but they could have been charged with aggravated stupidity. I mean, it's just like nobody understands the rationale behind this, because it's just there's little bites, and it's so easy to get caught. I mean, these sports books, they monitor this kind of activity, and when you see somebody making a lot of wagers on a single pitch, it raises all sorts of red flags, and it was just a matter of time before it was uncovered, allegedly.
I went through the indictment, and it was an interesting indictment. If you look at it, it had the pictures of the actual pitches digging into the dirt.
Yeah.
But they went through pitch by pitch and said, here's what he did just beforehand, and then here's what happened, and then here's where the money came from. Anna, what we have heard from the pitchers, though, is that, listen, we're innocent. In Ortiz's case, he was dragged into this 2 years into the scheme, allegedly, by Clase. But what we heard from Clase, too, is he was like, oh, they misinterpreted a conversation I was having about my rooster fighting.
Yeah, both people have maintained innocence. Both legal teams have said that their clients are innocent, so they are pleading not guilty. They are really fighting this, and they also have said that once we go through the court proceedings, it will be clear that this is not the case. Something else I wanted to point out that I feel like hasn't been brought up a lot, and there's been so many thoughts on this. I went to an Akron Roundtable conversation I think it was last month, with Alex Shepard. He writes for the New Republic, and he specifically covers sports and sports gambling, and he was talking about this. And, we hear all the time about sports gambling addictions and who are the people most doing it, and it's usually young men under 30. How old are Ortiz and Clase? Well, a lot of times we forget how young they are, 26
Right.
and 27. And he pointed that out, that they're the prime actually age for this. So you can't be totally surprised sometimes when these young guys are the ones, at the center of this.
So these prop bets seem to be a big problem, Karen. I know Governor DeWine was not really for sports gambling in the first place, and he wanted to tax the heck out of it. And he is someone who has talked about the prop bets and how dangerous they are. Where does that stand now? Because there has been a limit placed now, an agreement for a limit with Major League Baseball and the betting companies about how much you can bet on each of these, will he throw a ball or a strike? What's the governor saying about that?
Well, when I talked to him about this, which was during the World Series, he had said that after the World Series, he expected that Major League Baseball would have some sort of action when it came to banning prop bets. He was hoping that they would ban prop bets over $100. He said that was where the problem area is. Now, the MLB has banned prop bets over $200. But DeWine has said that was that area there that he was most concerned about. And at the time, they had all but one of the sports gambling operators on board to go ahead and do this. And DeWine also mentioned to me at the time that the NFL was interested. They were looking. And this was right after the NBA arrests. And so he said the NBA should be concerned. All major league sports should be concerned because it really does tarnish the sport. And gosh, when you think about how great Clase was and the performances that we saw from him, and now this has happened, it really changes in a way the way that we look back on him and think he had so much, he was so amazing, and yet he was, I guess, allegedly pulled in by this.
You can't dismiss the fact, though, that these are charges because there was extreme betting on those particular things. As Phil said, they can monitor those and say, wait a minute, how can so many people put a bet on a single pitch? But you wonder if there were other situations where he was just on his own, because when you look at the one of the playoff series, he kind of melted in that series, and it wasn't characteristically himself. And now you go back and everything is tainted.
Yeah, and you wonder.
Kind of melted?
He melted.
Yeah, he fully melted. Yeah.
So you wonder if that was on purpose, if somebody was profiting from that, where all that went. And I guess that's, again, the stuff that we'll hear about in
It's
in
interesting in the indictment, they focus on pitches in 2023 and 2025, but there's nothing in 2024, at least that I saw, which is when all that was happening. So a lot of people are speculating.
And so are his teammates.
Yeah.
And to
Yeah.
Anna's point about how sports gambling specifically, seems to target these young men, I mean, it's sold as easy money, and you see the partnerships that the Major League sports franchises have had with all the major betting companies. And it's pervasive at this point. So in a way, it's not shocking, but in a way it is, because you would expect that these athletes wouldn't want to damage the sport. They make plenty of money, all of that, but it's just everywhere. And I mean, this has been a scandal for baseball going back to the beginning of the game last century,
Yeah, well, I'm thinking of the Black Sox
Yeah,
scandal and other
exactly.
things. But it seemed like it was a lot harder to do back then. It's not just get on your cell phone and say, I'm going to throw a ball into the dirt and make money on that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there really seems to, I mean, the idea that gambling is not tied to criminal activity. I mean, we're seeing that with the NBA investigation here, that there may be connections here. And again, it's pervasive. You can do it, like you said, over your phone. Anybody can do it. And so there are people who allegedly shouldn't be doing it who allegedly are doing it.
Okay. I like your use of allegedly, your overuse of allegedly. We're covered. All right, we're going to move on from this, but we will be continuing to cover that story. Residents of Cleveland's Glenville and Collinwood neighborhoods, along with their council representatives, tore into Cleveland Mayor Justin Bibb over the public school district's plan to merge Collinwood and Glenville high schools as part of a broader consolidation that will result in 29 fewer schools in the district. Collinwood Councilman Mike Polensek said the merger would destabilize the neighborhoods. Phil, what was Bibb's response to the criticism, particularly from Polensek and Glenville Councilman Kevin Conwell?
Yeah, this is something nobody likes. Collinwood High School is a legendary high school in the city. I attended East High and West Tech, and both of those schools have gone away. And the fact that you have, I think it was 96 kids who are enrolled in a high school that once held thousands of kids.
Yeah.
It economically doesn't make any sense.
That was eye-opening, and that was what his response
96.
was. His response was, listen, the students are gone. And
Yeah.
so we need to take some action. What they were saying was, yeah, but this is from years of your disinvestment in these neighborhoods. That's why there are fewer kids, that this is the result of you, meaning the government's or the administration's actions.
Yeah, that could be a fair argument there. But the fact is that the schools, they're, hate to say it, but you can't open a whole school just for 96 kids.
Right.
I get the fear of the charter schools coming in and taking over and making the situation even worse. But they have invested. And Glenville is kind of considered now the marquee school of the city. And it's bad. Mike Polensek has come out against it. He is pro Collinwood. He's known for that. His support for the school. But it's times are changing kind of story.
Eventually, there will be a new school that will house the two of them. They're moving into Glenville if this plan is enacted by the school board. And then eventually a new school, they haven't said exactly where, a new building will be built to house this joint school. So what happens to the old buildings is a question. And there are a number of buildings that are owned by the school district that don't have uses today. There are some that have been turned into housing. You could probably
West
go
Tech.
live. You could
Yeah,
live in
West-
your old classroom.
Yeah.
There are some that have been turned in. There's one that's a manufacturing center and all kinds of stuff. But there are still many that are fallow. The question is, what will happen to not just Collinwood, but the other schools that will be vacated in this instance? Charter schools get first crack at it. That's one of the concerns Polensek had, is that you have charter schools move in, and we then continue to dilute the public schools and the money going to public schools and the students.
And that'll impact the Collinwood / Glenville school that ever happens there. So yeah, it's a tough situation that that they're going to have to address.
One of the things that that I heard from that meeting, and I hadn't considered this, but that someone mentioned, one of the residents said that two schools have always been rivals, that they're not going to get along. They're rivals in sports, but then also mentioned they're rivals academically, athletically, and they have rival gangs.
Yeah.
So there was this concern about safety. How is that dealt with?
Well, you're going to have a lot of conversations there, but it is true. I mean, they have been historically rivals on the football field, on the basketball court. These are kids from the neighborhood who have disputes outside of the classroom. I don't think that's an exaggeration. It is a consideration that you're going to be putting, rivals, gangs, perhaps, in the same building. And that's, again, going to be a challenge that they'll have to address.
Yeah, I think the mayor said we are, as you said, we're going to have a conversation. We're going to talk through this.
Yeah.
There's a process that goes involved in this, that, there's going to be police as well, as they have outside of buildings, those types of things. So they clearly are aware of it. We'll see where that particularly moves. Let's move now, though, to Canton, where City Council has cut public comments from its meetings, citing safety concerns and threats on social media. Many public bodies have strict rules for comments, such as time limits and requirements to sign up in advance. Cleveland City Council recently tightened its rules. Akron did as well. Canton's decision to cut comments, though, has disappointed residents. So, Anna, anyone who's ever covered a regular council meeting, and all of us have, knows that the comments can be a real pain. They often feature the same people saying the same things that prompt no action. In fact, council members...
Or entertainment, depending on how you look at it.
It can be that, too. But if you're a council member hearing this week in and week out, they're turning their ears off. None of this is going to lead to any action. But no one ever says, let's just cut the comments. What's going on in Canton where they decided to eliminate them?
Right. And so, I'm every other week I'm in Akron City Council, and so I've seen this. And a year or so ago, they decided to limit it to 10 speakers per meeting, and they also moved it to where if you are commenting on an agenda-specific item, they have those now at 5 o'clock instead of 6:30. So there are ways that other councils have kind of helped regulate this. But as you mentioned, Canton just decided, nope, we're going to pause it. We're going to let people cool off. Is actually what they said.
Okay.
And during the meeting, they mentioned some of the topics that have been raised, very, nothing to do with not just Canton, but also sometimes I've heard from residents, people will come there with valid concerns, but it's not something that a council member themselves can address, which you hear in other councils as well. I know in Akron, a lot of the times a council member will say, I'll talk with you after the meeting. We'll point you to the right place where you can get this solved. But apparently that's not happening either.
So they might be talking about state or federal policy or some other type of thing that
Right.
really isn't germane
Or
to...
no, it's even something that the county commissioners have jurisdiction over. So I'm hearing from residents that instead of saying, hey, we'll stay after and we'll connect you with the county commissioner, I've heard that they kind of roll their eyes or they just don't respond at all to that person. So that's why residents are really concerned here, because they're saying, hey, there are things we could be doing instead, educating folks about what council actually does versus just nobody can speak now.
And we've heard the council majority leader saying that people are basically using that to perform for social media. It's not for any constructive thing. But they also talked about hostility and
Yes.
threats and concerns that they have over that. What do they mean by that?
So what I'm hearing is that there was a council somebody was live streaming the council meeting, and there was some sort of threat against council members commented on social media. And then there were reports that all city employees were going to be targeted in some sort of threat. So the safety kind of came up, and they said, we need to pause, let people cool off because we're getting these threats. But some folks are saying, well, if the threats were all online, that it wasn't happening during a council meeting, although
Right.
it has, I've heard, gotten really heated at times, and folks it really actually, Mike, it started over the last 2 years, but there was a really controversial thing the city did where they banned basically people sleeping outside and homeless encampments. So there were a lot of folks that were really heated about that recently.
So there is some hope, I'm told, that comments could come back. You called it a cooling off period, which makes me think that at some point perhaps it would return.
Apparently, the council members are saying we'll revisit it soon. I know that there were only 2 dissenting votes to this, and one of them was Louis Giavasis, who is going to be the council president next year. So some residents are saying we're actually kind of hopeful that with him kind of as the the leader, that this will be implemented at least when council votes on its new rules next year. So it's not a forever thing as far as we know, but it would be interesting to see what they kind of come up with, if they're going to go with some restrictions going forward, or if they just kind of let it be the free-for-all that it has been.
And that's interesting. The guy who will be the council leader is one of the votes that was against this. So that's what gives them hope.
Yep.
Okay. Last story before our break. The Cuyahoga Arts and Culture Board approved more than $12 million in operating and project support grants for local arts-based organizations. It's the first disbursement of funds since voters approved raising the county cigarette tax from 30 cents to 70 cents per pack last year. So awards were more generous than they had been. IdeaStream, which contributed to the campaign to increase the tax, was among those organizations awarded grants. In the public comment period at the CAC meeting, 11 people spoke out against IdeaStream's partnership with Cleveland State University that converted the student-run radio station WCSB to Jazz Neo, operated by IdeaStream. And Anna, while the voters approved more than doubling the cigarette tax that funds the arts in Cuyahoga County, overall, the grant awards did not necessarily double.
Correct. And the reason for that, according to the board's executive director, is that they really kind of gave out all their funds the last cycle. They really just wanted to get those dollars in the hands of the organizations. And so they didn't have much kind of left in their, coffers, kind of banking on the levy. So once that passed, they were saying, okay, we're going to, just kind of do what we were doing. We're not going to go crazy this time around and double it. It didn't exactly translate. Now it's kind of the building back period.
So who received the grants? So we mentioned IdeaStream. IdeaStream got a little over $600,000 for the arts coverage that our team does with Carrie Wise and Dave DiOrio and Kabir Bhatia and Jean Marie Papoy. That's a lot of what that funds. But who else got money in this round?
All sorts of organizations, from big to small, from old to new. Playhouse Square, the Cleveland Orchestra, and the Cleveland Museum of Art got a big portion of it, up 14%. So those organizations are on it. But then there were some first-time recipients, including the Northeast Ohio chapter of the Tuskegee Airmen, the Babel Box Theater, and some other different programming like women in film and TV. So like I said, it really is quite a few organizations getting the funding, and the grants are from big to small.
So let's talk about the 11 commenters and their
Sure.
problems with IdeaStream's partnership with CSU. What happened there is there was a student-run radio station that no longer is student-run. It's now a jazz station that's operated by IdeaStream. The FCC license remains with Cleveland State. Obviously, anger about that, continued protest about that. And in this case, they wanted the board to perhaps delay the grant or cancel the grant
Yeah.
or compel some sort of action before it happened. But the board didn't discuss it after that and just voted unanimously to award the grant.
Right. They said, they felt bad that this is the conversation that's happening right now in the community and hope that there would be more communication on it. But no, that no grants were delayed or paused. Some people wanted that, as you mentioned. So they wanted a grant to be delayed until essentially WCSB goes back to what it was. Some folks even said, though, that IdeaStream should earn back the, quote, good favor they've lost in the community, so the funds should just be not given at all. So that was, as you mentioned, the public comment period kind of focused on that, but no decision was made.
Well,
influenced
a
by that.
decision was made. It
Wasn't influenced by that.
Exactly. And then finally, Carolyn Eisenhart, who was the board president of Cuyahoga Arts and Culture, her quote was, "I hate that our community is in a position like this," and she encouraged all the parties to, quote, keep talking.
Yes.
All right. I appreciate that conversation, and I'll appreciate what's coming up next, because we're going to talk about a proposal to require photo ID for mail-in ballots in Ohio, and Karen's going to join us to talk a little bit more about that. This is the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable. I'm Mike McIntyre, and we'll be right back. You are back with the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre, joined this week by Phil Trexler of the Marshall Project Cleveland, State House News Bureau Chief Karen Kassler, and IdeaStream's Akron-Canton reporter Anna Huntsman. A reminder before we get back to the roundtable to take the weekly IdeaStream news quiz. You'll find it at ideastream.org/quiz. And let me share some feedback from the conversation that we had before the break, a number of the topics that we had. First, about the sports betting, Marvin sends an email saying, maybe we should all start betting on the weather. Then someone will work very hard to figure out how to control it. I like that idea, Marvin.
Great idea.
Marvin, that's a good one. Claudia says, I understand this betting as predatory, causing vulnerable people to become addicted. And it's sad. That's Claudia's point of view. We'd love to hear yours, by the way. You can send an email to soi@ideastream.org about any of our topics. Michael said, lots of victims here in the sports betting situation. He said the bettors who aren't in on the scam, the fans rooting for the team, and the teammates who aren't getting the cheaters' total focus on the effort. And then finally, Daryl has a question about Canton City Council. I'm not sure if we know exactly the answer to this, but he wondered how long the public comment portion of Canton's council meetings have been in place. Do we know how long they've offered public comment? It seems to me like it's
I
forever?
don't know that question. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not sure.
So certainly since you've been covering Canton
Oh, yeah.
and
Yep.
for the years that I've been looking at it. So it's been a long time, Daryl. We'll try to find out an exact number for you. All right, a provision tucked into the legislation ending the government shutdown may affect an issue the state legislature has been working on and that Governor Mike DeWine has tried to influence through executive order. The provision closes a loophole in the Farm Bill and the result would be an effective ban enacted in a year on most hemp-derived cannabis products. Would state policy supersede that? Karen, I know that Sarah Donaldson has been working on this story and has been covering it for many months. What's the story here? Is the federal government going to ban something the state hasn't even enacted rules on?
Well, the federal government has banned marijuana.
Well, that's true.
And yet voters had approved legalization of recreational marijuana in Ohio in 2023. And this has actually been something that voters or that the government has talked about here in Ohio since that time. DeWine has been pushing very hard for some rules because these products, this so-called intoxicating hemp, Delta 8, and some of these things were outside of the rules that voters approved in 2023. And so he had really been pushing lawmakers to come up with something because he said this stuff was too available, that kids can buy it. There's no regulation on it. And so then he eventually issued a ban just fairly recently. That's on hold in court. And now this federal action here is we still don't really know exactly how it's going to affect Ohio. But Sarah has been reporting that there's been discussions with the House and the Senate to try to come up with a bill that really finalizes state cannabis laws and strictly regulates that other THC. So this is all kind of in process here, but we're kind of waiting to see at this point, I think.
Yeah, and it involves, the drinks, the gummies, all those kinds of things that are sold outside of dispensaries. Yeah. And what's interesting about that is the number that we heard from the federal government is like 0.4 milligrams per container. Above that would be the stuff that they're regulating. Most of these things are 5 to 7 milligrams, and so we're talking about basically eliminating that industry.
Yeah, and that's part of where DeWine has been saying all along is we need to come up with some rules here so that maybe the federal government doesn't take action. I mean, when you look at what happened with the federal ban here, it came apparently from Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, which is actually the largest producer of this kind of hemp. And there were 24 senators who voted to take the ban out of this bill, and all but 2 of them were Democrats, and the 2 that were Republicans who voted to take the ban out of this bill were Ted Cruz and Rand Paul, the other senator from Kentucky, recognizing that this is a big industry. And so, yeah, there's a lot of small businesses who say that they are very concerned about this, that they are selling these products, and they want regulation. There's been talk about licensing, that kind of thing. We're just kind of waiting to see what happens at this point.
How does this have anything to do with the government shutdown and reopening the government? Because that wasn't a thing that they debated. They were talking about healthcare premiums, and they were talking about SNAP benefits, and suddenly now it's all about intoxicating hemp.
Well, in the Farm Bill, the Farm Bill is where you get supplemental nutrition assistance program payments, SNAP payments, all this stuff. We've been sitting around not having a Farm Bill for quite a while, and so that was part of the action here in the Farm Bill was dealing with this so-called intoxicating hemp.
Okay. Accusations of hazing by players on Youngstown's Ursuline High School football team and a cover-up by the school and the Catholic diocese intensified this week as another student claimed he was hazed. A federal lawsuit was amended to add the new accusations alleging a culture of hazing going back to at least 2022, involving players sexually abusing, hazing, and assaulting fellow students and then filming it. And attorney Subodh Chandra says there is video showing the abuses, and the school officials did nothing when confronted with them.
Yeah, he's saying that the school knew about it and basically encouraged the people involved to destroy evidence or not say anything. So that's what his perspective is and what he's hearing.
And the diocese and the school have said that's not true.
Yes, they have said that as soon as they heard about it, they reported it, and that they have taken, action against the coaches that may have been involved, suspending them. So they are saying that that's not true. But Chandra is saying that they reported it in June 2025, whereas the videos go back to at least 2022. So more to come out on that for sure.
We heard the first case. And we talked about it on this show several months ago. But now he's saying this evidence shows, as you mentioned, it goes back to 2022. This is a pattern that has gone a lot longer than this single incident.
Right. The initial complaint said the hazing and the alleged actions took place in the camp this past year. The amended complaint brings up something that happened in the camp last year. This is a second player reporting this. And then, of course, there's another one from a female student that said that this happened to her. That's what they're saying is this has been a pattern. This is just not a one-off thing.
Okay. Let's get to a unique story the Marshall Project did, an enterprise story. Marshall Project Cleveland recently published an investigation into the Mohican Youth Center in Perrysville in Ashland County, Ohio's largest residential treatment facility for youth with behavioral or mental health problems. There have been numerous reports over the last year drawing huge emergency response of chaos in the facility with fighting, property damage, and also inadequate policies to deal with it. So, Phil, let's talk about what Brittany Haler laid out in the specifics of the chaos. What was happening there?
Yeah, a little bit of a historical context, I think, is required. Years ago, the state tried to shut down Mohican. There was issues of fighting Basically a lack of institutional control going over there. There's a lot of fights. Some describe them as riots. The staff is overwhelmed. These are kids who come from very challenged backgrounds, either referred to by the juvenile court or referred through the foster care system. So these are some of the, big challenges. These are young children who face a lot of difficulties in their life. And they're all housed together in the middle of this park out there in rural Ashland County. So they tried to shut it down. They failed. New owners came in about a year ago. There was some optimism that things were going to improve, that yes, there were issues in the past, but now we're going to move forward. Brittany Haler's reporting found that it's still the same old chaos that we had seen in the past. Multiple riots just in the past year, kids fighting, kids taking, legs from chairs and using them as weapons.
Yeah, bedposts.
Bedposts,
Yeah.
yeah. Kids are getting hurt, staff's getting hurt. There's a reluctance to call 911 because of all the, that involves of, public records and whatnot. So
Yeah, let's dig
it's a
into that.
challenge system.
Yeah, let's dig into that because you would think if this is going on, a teacher will call 911 or anybody who's there, and they have. And what's alleged here is that the owners were telling them no one calls 911 unless you check with one of the three bosses.
Right.
And so the bosses have to approve a call to 911, even though somebody might be witnessing something that needs a 911 call.
Yeah, you got to get multiple layers of approval there. It goes back to what was happening prior, is that there were a high volume of 911 calls. Whenever something bad happened, staff would call 911, but then they get dinged for it in the reviews, the inspections. So I think there was an attempt there to kind of streamline that process, but it doesn't help the situation when you need multiple approvals in order to call just a simple 911 call.
So we see that one of the teachers that Brittany talked to, she spoke out, had quit. We saw a strain on the emergency first responders. How is the community responding to this happening?
The community, I think, initially was probably hopeful, disappointed that the state, lost in their attempt to provide greater oversight there and shut it down. But also, too, what we were hearing, what Brittany heard, was, there's a lot of runaways going on. There's some break-ins. I think the neighbors are concerned also, too, about the safety of the children. There's a vast forest there, and kids, you just can't run away and hide in a forest. I mean, there's all sorts of things that could go wrong there. So I think it just comes basically down to the lack of institutional control is what's happening here.
So how does anyone get a handle on that? Where do we stand now? Is the state moving in? Are there going to be more regulations, or can we just expect 911 calls every 2 months because of riots?
Yeah, I think I think we're going to see. Certainly, our reporting has brought attention to this situation. That no, it's not improved. I know Brittany has heard from lawmakers about different changes that could occur here, but we're not done with our reporting. I'll just put it that way. Yeah.
Okay. Cleveland police have launched a new specialized team to deal with street and nuisance crimes impacting residents. It's called STANCE, and I know that I will not let that acronym stand. It's the Street and Nuisance Crime Enforcement Unit. So they have their work cut out for them, as this week brought a fresh wave of vehicle break-ins. Anna, as far as the break-ins, police say it's young people that are responsible for these fast-moving crimes, and in many cases, they're not even snatching anything. They just go and bust a window out.
Yeah, and first of all, I just want to say we all know your stance on acronyms.
Exactly. So we've defined
Secondly,
it.
So it's based on what they're seeing with surveillance video and security cameras, is that it's young people, a lot of times in a stolen car, breaking the window, and just kind of like maybe rummaging around or maybe not even doing anything and then going off. And a lot of times these are all in kind of like one area. They've had different reports in Ohio City. I know there was one downtown Cleveland a couple weeks ago. There was one around a hotel recently as well. So it's these kind of concentrated areas that they're seeing.
Yeah, you drive by, you'll see a whole block with garbage bags as windows because everyone was nailed there. So the question, and residents, by the way, have been critical about
Yeah.
police response on some of these cases. So how would the new stance unit work?
So this is going to be a targeted unit focused just specifically on these kind of like break-in things, and it's going to have crime analysts, and they're actually going to deploy surveillance trailers, which I had to look up and see what those look like, and they kind of look like I guess I don't really know how to describe it, but it's a little, if you've ever seen like the cameras, like flock cameras around license plate, and they kind of look like a little tripod with a little thing. That's what they look like, and so they're going to be kind of deploying them around different areas of Cleveland to try to really just focus on this and nip it in the bud, I guess.
All right. We will keep an eye on that story as well. In the meanwhile, Cleveland is putting together a proposal for city council in which cameras would be employed to crack down on people who illegally park in the city. The enforcement would also mean steeper fines. The goal, the city says, is to crack down on practices such as double parking and also free up short-term parking spaces. So Big Brother is doing parking enforcement, Phil?
Yeah, we really like cameras.
I was
that,
just going to say that. We
oh
love
yeah, we're
cameras
big
in
on
Cleveland.
cameras that issue tickets, aren't we? Yeah, bring us more. I don't know if you noticed it, but there's a lot of like restaurants in Cleveland downtown, and there's very few drive-through windows. So folks are obviously the problem has gotten out of hand. There's people double parking. There's other people who are taking spots. The city wants turnover of those parking spots. The business owners want turnover. You know, they want people to come in, get their stuff, and get out. So this is an attempt to, put a stop to the folks who park there longer or the folks who double park.
So, and with the fines going up, I mean, your Turkey Tom at Jimmy John's could be another $60.
Oh yeah, and that's not including drink or chips.
Other cities have used similar systems. Were they successful?
Yeah, Pittsburgh. They tried it, and they say that things are working good there. It's what did they say? Double parking was reduced 97%.
So maybe
there
it
you
works.
go. Yeah.
In Cleveland, you mentioned cameras. The council has said we're not using traffic cameras for speed enforcement. So in this city, that's not happening. I mean, there's all kinds of state hoops you'd have to jump through anyway. So you wonder whether that same council that says no cameras for moving
Yeah,
would
for
say
moving.
the same about parking. Do we know anything
I
about that?
would think council would be opposed to it, but I don't know. This is a little bit different because, it's just an automated parking ticket is basically what it is, and we kind of get those. Instead of having a meter person come around doing all that, you'll have the camera doing it, but it's an attempt.
All right.
Yeah.
Karen, a Republican-sponsored bill introduced this week in the Ohio House would require people using mail-in ballots to also provide a copy of their photo ID. State Representative Ron Ferguson of Wintersville in Jefferson County says it would make the absentee vote-by-mail process more secure. Opponents say elderly and disabled people would be inconvenienced by having to make photocopies of their ID. So what does he say is the problem that he's trying to solve, and how will this solve it?
Well, he talks about the difference between voting in person versus voting by mail, and saying when you vote in person, you do have to show your photo ID, so it's more secure to do that. And so he wants to provide a way to secure that for mail-in absentee voting as well. Now, Jen Miller, who's the executive director of the League of Women Voters of Ohio, says this is not needed, that voters already have to give verifiable information when they request a ballot and when they return it. And she's worried about, obviously, voters being disenfranchised through this. And it still goes back to the idea that we've even heard from Republican Secretary of State Frank LaRose that Ohio's voting system is very safe, it's very accurate, it's very secure. And there are probably, by my count, about 30 bills that are currently in the legislature that deal with elections in some way, and a handful of those specifically deal with things like voter registration and photo ID and absentee voting. So I know Republicans have talked about this being making sure and closing all the loopholes, but typically Democrats are the ones saying this is potentially keeping some people who are using the system, which is working well, from being able to use it.
Got an email from Bob who says, does the historically corrupt, illegally gerrymandered Ohio State House really want to throw out 3,000 valid Cuyahoga County ballots, just one out of Ohio's 88 counties? He says, we know that both Republicans and Democratic voters use absentee ballots. Incumbents who voted for that legislation could face strong primary challenges and general election headwinds due to their obvious attempt to disenfranchise their own constituents. So he's obviously siding with what you just described as the Democrats who say people will be disenfranchised. But the idea is, as you mentioned before, you do have to show an ID if you vote at the polls. So shouldn't you have to show an ID if you're voting in another way?
Yeah, and I believe there's a part of this bill that would require organizations that offer mail-in ballot applications to also offer these free photocopies of the ID that they are requiring here. So, obviously there's a little bit of trying to work all this stuff out here. But this comes, there was a bill that was passed by the Ohio Senate just a couple of, I guess it was last week maybe. I'm losing track of time, of course, that would require that absentee ballots be in-house at boards of elections on election night, and eliminate that 4-day grace period that right now is being offered for people who are returning their ballots by mail. That they've carved out an exception for overseas and military voters. They are not covered by this. But basically, the requirement would be that if you mail your ballot in, it has to be in-house, not just postmarked, but in-house by Election Day. And it's the same argument here that it's going to potentially disenfranchise voters who put their ballot in the mail and thought it was going to be okay. Maybe they put it in the mail a month ago and it didn't get there. So this is just more kind of moving around with some of the election laws, though Governor Mike DeWine has said he wants to see real evidence of why these things are needed before he signs another election-related law. We'll just have to see on that.
Okay. By the way, we have a note here from Tom who says parking cameras are just speed cameras that give you a ticket when your speed is 0. All right. Thought that was a good one. So I guess they're already outlawed then, if that's the case. All right. Time now to take another really quick break. When we come back, the former Firestone plant won't become a police station. And is Cedar Point in trouble? This is the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable. I'm Mike McIntyre. We'll be right back. You are back with the Sound of Ideas Reporters Roundtable from IdeaStream Public Media. I'm Mike McIntyre with Karen Kassler, Anna Huntsman, and Phil Trexler. City of Akron says it will move forward with demolition of the historic Firestone Plant 1, turning down a developer's pitch to renovate the site into a new police headquarters. Anna, when this developer came in and you reported about it, people were like, okay, maybe there's, you're telling me there's a chance. No, so.
No, the city said that the application was kind of incomplete, and a lot of the things that they brought up just kind of didn't work with what the city was hoping. I mean, the one, you mentioned it, they wanted it to be a police station, and I covered this when they were previously looking for bids for where should the new police station be. And they wanted it to be within 1.5 miles of downtown. They said that was very important to have the police station there, and this plant is not. It's kind of close to downtown, but it's not in that radius. And so they basically said, well, we didn't give that exception to anybody else when we previously put this out, so we can't do that, number one. But then there were some other issues where they said that it would position Akron taxpayers to assume fiscal risk for the project. It would make the city the primary tenant. Quite a few different things. And so, yeah, there were a few developers interested and a few toured the property, but only one ended up turning in an RFP for it. So it seems like this is kind of now heading for the wrecking ball.
RFP?
Sorry, request for proposals.
Thank you very much. Appreciate that. So it looked like this was going to be demolished. Then the council said, let's give it a little bit of time. Is that time up? What is the schedule now?
Well, it would have had to be decided by November 17th, which is Monday. So I'm going to be at council Monday. I'm curious to see if there's any last minute efforts that happen, if anybody speaks out about this. But that was what council agreed to, was they had to find a new alternative use for the building by the 17th. And the city does not want to move forward with this. So it looks as if demolition, they already were preparing to demolish most of the building. It was just the front facade and clock tower that they wanted to save because it's an icon. It's a symbol in the Akron community of its, huge tire history. So they've already been preparing the building for demolition. So it looks like that's where it's headed.
All right. A class action lawsuit has been filed in the merger of Six Flags and Cedar Fair last year. Cedar Fair, the parent company of Cedar Point and Kings Island, merged with Six Flags in July of 2024, creating one of the biggest amusement park operators in North America. But the lawsuit accuses Six Flags of misleading investors. So, Phil, who filed the lawsuit? What are they alleging?
Yeah, it was filed in federal court by a municipal pension fund. In other words,
Investor,
yeah, a group representing public employees in Michigan. And it says that basically that Six Flags kind of cleaned house, but put some things under the rug, just trying to make themselves look better prior to the merger to help, kind of grease the skids for it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what's interesting here is the stock since the
yeah.
merger has really dropped. It was $55 a share. Now, as of Monday, it was $16.
Down to 16, yeah, and that's what they're saying is that there's like some infrastructure repairs and maintenance stuff that was never done, or was, not exactly, they weren't forthcoming about it. So that was a big thing, and there's just basically underinvestment of the legacy parks, and the Six Flags, it's become since the merger, it's like one of the biggest.
Yeah. It makes you worry about Cedar Point, obviously, how important it is to Northeast Ohio, and so we'll certainly keep an eye on that. Sports fans in Cleveland have mourned the deaths recently of two basketball coaching greats. Kevin Mackey died of an apparent heart attack Tuesday at the age of 79. He'll be remembered as the coach that led Cleveland State on its charge to the 1986 NCAA men's basketball tournament, making it to the Sweet 16, including a first-round defeat of Bobby Knight's Indiana Hoosiers. I get all chills when I think about that time, Phil.
Yeah, me too. I actually, my friend was the manager of the CSU team back then, so I had some access as a young man, hanging out at the old Holiday Inn dorm that the players had.
Yeah.
Mouse McFadden and all that, drink beer with Mackey in his office after a win over Southwest Missouri. So it was really, it was such a small little program that was doing such great things.
Yeah, it really captivated
and it broke
the
your
city.
heart what happened to Mackey. And the one thing that always stuck me out, America's always a country of second chances. That guy never got a second chance. I know what, it was ugly, him being, perp walked outside of the crack house.
Let's explain that.
He
faced personal struggles with addiction.
He did.
Yeah, he was in a crack house for like 9 hours and was perp walked out of that, as you said. But he did seek treatment. He remained sober and returned to basketball. He was a scout. Larry Bird hired him.
But he never got a second chance at coaching,
Exactly.
which was sad to see. And Lenny Wilkins was the
That's the
complete
next one I was gonna
opposite.
say, right.
I mean, he's just the scandal-free, just a gentleman. His players loved him, and Lenny was a class guy.
And to that point, the Cavaliers fan base mourned the death of Lenny Wilkins. He died over the weekend at the age of 88. He coached the Cavs when they still played at the Richfield Coliseum from 86 to 93, led the team to 5 playoff appearances before coaching the team. He played point guard for the Cavs from 72 to 74. He was enshrined on the Cavaliers' Wall of Honor in 2022. And I've got a little piece of trivia. Anna, do you know, I know someone who sometimes makes the news in Cuyahoga County who was on that Sweet 16 team for Cleveland State. Do you know who it is?
Well, I read my scripts beforehand, so yes.
She does know, but you didn't, Phil.
I'm
Do you know who it
prepared.
is?
Trying to think.
County Councilman Martin Sweeney was on that
yes,
team.
of course. Yeah, he had the towel.
Yes,
He's the guy
exactly.
with the towel at the end of the bench.
That was his job.
That's right.
Exactly. Okay, Sweeney, don't call us about that. Finally, the Longaberger Company made a name for itself selling baskets and turned heads by constructing a headquarters that looked like a giant picnic basket in Newark. It also built its own Hallmark-ready town in Frazeysburg, including a welcome center and homestead. And forget the pink flamingo, it has a giant basket full of apples as a sculpture right in the middle of the cul-de-sac there. And it's for sale, Phil. Are you in the market?
I have enough baskets at my house that are still in the box, and my wife won't get rid of. So.
But it's also some buildings. It's actually like a movie set. It looks like a little Hallmark movie town that you could go ahead and buy.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
great.
so the lady from the big city comes back home to the basket town that she left when she wanted more for her life, and now she meets someone right by the apple basket and falls in love. That's my pitch.
Okay, I love it. I didn't hear any puns in there, though. I was hoping you would slip one in. Like earlier when I missed it and you said my stance on something.
missed that? Yeah.
Yeah, now I got it. You're the
Okay, well.
pun queen.
I try.
The basket's not included, though, right? The basket
No, the
building?
basket building is not. No, that's separate. This is a different, but it does have a little, as I said, a basket sculpture in the middle of it. Either way, it's a basket. Take a look at it. I think it's like $500,000 or something like that. Whatever the amount of money is, we can afford it.
5.7 million.
Okay, right, a half of $10 million. Okay,
There you go.
Karen, are you going to buy it? No.
No, but it does remind you of how big Longaberger baskets were at one point, that they
Huge.
would set up this whole little town here. And of course, the building you can see from one of the state routes. And I've heard stories about airplanes trying to fly through the handles
Oh
of
my
that big
gosh.
building.
Wow.
So that's for sale, too, as far as I know.
Will they have a request for proposals, do you think?
I don't know if they will. All right, we're done with that. That wraps up the show for today. My thanks to you, Anna Huntsman, and you, Phil Trexler of the Marshall Project Cleveland, and of course, Karen Kassler. Good to spend time with you each week here.
Go Guards.
Go Guards. There you go. I got paid twice.